Catus Maximus here. This time with a little bit longer review, this time of a 2007 Norco Shore 3 FreeRide mountain bike, or downhill mountain bike, but there are some differences between back then what was intended for free riding and what was intended for downhill mountain biking. So this was a bike I saved up for a long time and bought on a pretty good deal. Bikes like these don't sell very often. This one is at the shop for quite some time, and I believe I bought it in 2008, and I got about 35% off on this bike, so that was definitely pretty cool. The newest bikes are really amazing, but this really had like some of the cool, more heavier duty upgrades that still exist today, and they've come out with a zillion different standards, and it's all kind of weird. This is the start of when bikes really started getting weird and basically proprietary. I mean, you can get aftermarket parts, but it seems there's just a zillion different parts. It's not like your traditional 10-speed or your commuter bike where, you know, a lot of parts are interchangeable. Where obviously on this bike they wouldn't be. So this bike has 7 inches of travel, front and rear. These are RockShox Domain 318s in the front. I pulled off a lot of the stickers. I didn't like the 1.5 zillion stickers. It has the front shocks are chromoly steel stanchions. They're 32 millimeters in diameter, and these shocks have actually been pretty reliable and smooth. I bought this new, so I had a warranty, and these shocks started leaking right there. That knob is the rebound adjustment. It started leaking through there, but I had it fixed, and this is years and years and years later, and so you can see it hasn't started leaking. I have changed the oil, admittedly only once. It's an Allen screw in that rebound on these shocks, and that little red knob has an Allen wrench inside it. And it's never fallen out on me. And if you ever lose it, all you need is a small, like 2 millimeter Allen wrench. This bike has these Q-Lite hubs, which there's not a lot of information on, but they've been really reliable. They use rubber seal cartridge bearings with additional seals on these cups, and they've been great. They've been great. And if you have any issues with the bearings, you can just get new bearings at any bearing shop. Obviously, if you're well-to-do, you get all ceramic bearings, but silicon nitride bearings would probably be $500 just for the 2 bearings in that front hub. It uses the RockShox Maxle system, which is like a quick release lever, but it's actually a hollow axle that unscrews, and it hasn't been bad for me. There's some upgrades where you can get a solid one, and they've been okay, to tell you the truth. I know, or I believe they went away from this standard, but it's worked out for me. And it's a 20 millimeter axle in the front. We have a 12 millimeter axle in the back. The nice thing about this Norco is it was one of the early bikes that had the 150 millimeter rear hub. So as you can see, there is still some dishing where the spokes are a little flatter on the side with the cog set, but it's nowhere near as severe as on a 135 millimeter bike, because those spokes on this side end up being really pretty flat, and that obviously the triangulation is what provides the stability for the wheel. So kicking those spokes out gives you more stability, more strength, and all that 15 millimeters was added to the cassette side so that they could do that. And it does. It makes for a nice strong rear wheel. I really like that, although it's hard to find anything for 150 millimeter. These hubs have the standard 6-bolt mount for the disc brakes. I just have a standard DR rear derailleur, because if you get in a wreck and you damage or break off your derailleur, you know, why have a really expensive one on there? Although this one's been just fine. Sometimes, as you can see, it does knock against the suspension, but that's the way it goes. I did upgrade the Jockey Wheels. The DR comes with sleeve bearing, but this is a ball bearing lower and a ceramic bearing upper Jockey Wheel from an XT or an XTR or something, and it works. Those have worked out great. This greasy cassette is actually the famous XTR 8-speed cassette with the that's an 12 by 32, so the little gear is actually 12 teeth, so it's a little bit stronger, a little bit deeper teeth, a little bit more grip. And I know I have too much grease back here, but it's just really smooth. The top 3 cogs are titanium, and they've really held up well, to tell you the truth. And I have a Hayes Stroker rear disc brake. I have a frame pad that came with the bike, and you can see it gets a little bit torn up. These are the Shimano PDM 515 clipless pedals, and they worked out great for me as well. Never had any problems with them. I have some bear claws, but when I've been doing a lot of cross-country riding, so clipless are a lot better on these full suspensions. You don't lose so much energy. I do have a front derailleur. I rode for a long time without a front derailleur, and indeed it was magical, but this bike is so heavy, it's 50 pounds. I just end up getting off the bike and walking up the hills anyway. Some other upgrades were the race face bash guard. Mountain bikes like these don't usually have 3 front chain rings, almost never. You only ever would have 1 or maybe 2, a middle and a small. So you have a bash ring. I have a race face middle chain ring with the steel shift post, and that works great, and the Valletta climbing gear. There was some issues with this Norco. There's a little spot down there where the suspension hits the frame, and I have to do something about that. Where the derailleur cable runs under the bottom of the bike was actually cutting into the frame when it came out around the backside. There we go. And so I had to use a piece of derailleur housing to help protect the frame right there. It has an interesting box structure. Gusseted frame. This isn't the original frame. They had like a forged front end piece, and it ended up cracking and breaking, so they issued a recall. So another good reason to have bought this new. And so I got the frame replaced. So their replacement was this frame with this heavy duty head tube, heavy duty side gussets, and a big bottom gusset. 1.5-inch head tube on this. Oh, I didn't go to the rear shock. That's a Fox Shock Vanilla. This is one of those, I believe, 8.75-inch shocks. And it's been great. This is 10 years old, and it hasn't leaked or anything. The rebound adjustment still works just great. Fox really does make a nice shock. My spring is a 400-pound spring. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe, so I'll make more videos. Actually, I always make videos whether or not anybody subscribes. Here's a look at the other side of the bike. Actually, I should stand back. I'm getting better at making these videos. I have a WTB. I don't know what exact model of seat this is, but this actually works out pretty well. It's fairly comfortable. Not as comfortable as on my commuter bike, but I really like it. WTB makes really nice products. This is like a heavy-duty leatherette or something. Other parts to talk about. It has the Husfelt spline type cranks, and I haven't had any problems with these getting loose. There were some people complaining about that, but for me it's been great. There's the other side of the, let's see if I can get it to focus. Oh, come on. There we go. So there's that race face and that Valletta climbing gear. I forgot to mention that these are the chainring bolts are the FSA forged aluminum, and they get a little bit loose, but you tighten them up every once in a while, and they've held up. All the pivots on the suspension are rubber sealed ball bearing. One other upgrade is there was some issues with this side cracking, and I suspect it was from, and I'm not a professional mountain biker. I don't do the big jumps or anything. But people who do ride this bike to its full capabilities, when you land and you have, this came with 8-inch rear brake rotors, which were huge. I believe what was happening is, you know, you have some rear brake applied, you land, and it just overloaded this seat stay. So I reduced the brake size to a 6-inch Avid rotor, just to put less stress on it, and I don't ride that quite as hard that I need an 8-inch rear brake, although I'd like to get a better caliper. The Hayes strokers aren't that great. Stroker ride. Something interesting is when I upgraded from the LX cassette to this Oops, ran out of recording time. So that XTR cassette is definitely pretty dirty. I don't know if we can get it to focus. It does. But you can see it just has a spider and all the gears are riveted to it. It's pretty lightweight. Upgrading to that cassette and reducing the rotor size from 8 to 6 reduced a ½ pound of weight off the rear wheel. And it really got responsive. These are the WTB dual duty FreeRide rims, and they stay true. They really are heavy duty. You can see, if this will focus for me, there we go. It's a double wall rim with 2 tubular structures on each side, so not a light rim, but definitely a heavy duty rim. Moving up, I do have the Salsa seat clamp that has the little metal steel insert, so it's not threading into aluminum. I like that Salsa. I do have the this is the original headset, so it's a Gap headset or King Creek headset with a Gap stem, and the Husfelt riser bar, and it's like 1.25 inches or something tapered, so it's always interesting getting on the bike and just seeing how thick the whole structure is up here. This also has the Chris King pull-through headset. So if we look to the bottom, maybe this way I can get some. It's black, it's hard to see, but it fills in the whole space of this 1.5 inch head tube, and there's a rod that goes through the head tube and kind of holds it together a little better, and you don't have any star nut that's jammed in there and doesn't really provide a lot of clamping force. Besides that, I did upgrade to Saint, the first generation Saint front brakes, and those are amazing. If anybody can get these first generation ones, you won't be disappointed. They're totally adjustable. You can adjust the handle position, the free stroke. They use mineral oil. They have never, these brakes are 10 years old and no leaks, period, at all. Really nice dual diameter 4-piston caliper. Tons of modulation, you know, 4 heavy duty high strength steel bolts for caliper rigidity. These have been just monster brakes. And I have them against a Hayes 8-inch rotor, so I'm totally able to get tons and tons of stopping power. I found these weird little washers so the bolts won't get loose. I recommend anybody get these things. They come connected and pre-bled. That's how I recommend it. Don't get like a caliper and a hose. Just try to get it as the set. That way they're just ready to install and ride. And I definitely want to upgrade those for the rear brakes. And it's kind of neat because you can, with the free stroke, the handle has this little forward motion, which you kind of fiddle with. It's kind of weird, but you get used to that. It has the servo wave, so there's a little ball bearing in there. And the thrust arm, if I can get this to focus. Look away. Come on. Oh wow, it won't focus. There we go. So there's a little, that arm swings back and forth with a ball bearing at the end of it, and so it is triangulated. The arms starts getting closer and closer to the pivot point, giving you more leverage as your stroke progresses. That's what servo wave is as the stroke progresses, the fulcrum changes and you get more and more force. So that's how you get all this modulation, is over the free stroke you can just get a light amount of pressure, but when you start really applying a lot of brakes, increases your leverage ratio and of course sacrificing stroke. But since you've already clamped down on the brakes, they're just great. One thing of note, I always say a safety thing, keep your fingers out of brake rotors on bicycles. They'll just, you know, chop things off. Other weird safety, but I've cut myself pretty bad on a brake rotor doing that, just changing a tire. I've had to fiddle with the cables some because these aren't staying up and they kind of rub on the crown of the shock. My shifter cables are Jaguar Kevlar and they've held up. They're okay. I believe that's just about it for this Norco Shore. Just wanted to put this out there. There's a lot of mountain biking videos, but not a ton, just about all the different crazy mountain bikes that were made. And so this Norco has been great. And even when you occasionally ride around town to a friend's house, it's awesome being on a bike like this. You can see that steep front rake angle. If you don't see a curb, you can just ride over it. You basically don't have to get off the seat at all, regardless of the kind of bumps or transitions. It's obviously very comfortable. And on the trail, it's amazing too. It's pretty sweet. You have about 2 inches of sag, and it just glides over everything, to tell you the truth. And I've never used up the whole travel of this bike, ever. I don't hit it that hard, and it's surprising. I have gone off some jumps and stuff, and I've used up about 5.5 inches of the front shocks. Some people are curious. They will slide all the way up to the top, and all use up the whole amount of the stanchion. Because the bike's already a little funny looking. Because to get all that travel, they just have to push the front wheel further and further away from the bike. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out. Quick addendum. I have the Horry locking grips. These are rubberized with over a plastic core that has these tabs and these tabs, and they fit in these lock rings on both sides, and you have end caps to prevent stuff from getting in the handlebars. And it has Allevio shifters, and they've worked out just fine. One other thing of note is down here I also had to add, come on, focus, a plastic guard. You can see right in the middle here. And because of the derailleur and the brake cable housings rubbing on that aluminum arm and starting to, cut into it. So I recommend that on any kind of suspension mountain bike, is to make sure the cables aren't rubbing into stuff, because they'll want to do that. And on the aluminum frames, in the grit, it will just eat its way right through. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye. Addendum 2, before I forget, this is the horse link suspension with the horizontal shock. It moves all the weight down lower. The difference on a horse link is obviously there's 4 pivot points. 1, 2, 3, 4 that are independent of the axle. The axle can be considered a 5th pivot point. The big difference is that there is a pivot point that is here, either in line or slightly lower than the axle itself. And I don't know how to explain how the geometry works, but it prevents what is known as brake jacking. So yes, when you're applying the rear brakes going down the hill, just continuously slowing yourself down with the brakes on the whole time, the suspension feels like you're not using the brakes at all. It remains very supple while you're riding the brakes, basically, and it's been amazing. I mean, feel like you have a lot of control, and the tire is just glued to the ground. Anyway, bye.